Right, are you all snuggled up and ready for bed? This is a story by someone called Beatrix Potter, and it's the tale of Peter Rabbit. So snuggle down, pull the covers up, and I'll read you your bedtime story. Right, are you ready? Pull the sheets right up and get nice and snuggled down. Once upon a time there were 4 little rabbits, and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail and Peter. They lived where their mother in a sandbank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. Now you're going to have to look in the book from time to time to see the pictures. But there's a lovely picture here on this page showing the bunny rabbits in their burrow. "Now, my dears," said old Mrs. Rabbit one morning, "you may go into the fields or down the lane, but don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there and he was put in a pie by Mrs. McGregor." That's not very nice, is it? "Now run along and don't get into mischief. I'm going out." Then old Mrs. Rabbit took a basket and her umbrella and went through the wood to the baker's. She bought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. Flopsy, Mopsy and Cottontail were good little bunnies, and they went down the lane to gather blackberries. But Peter, who was very, very naughty, ran straight away to Mr. McGregor's garden and squeezed under the gate. First he ate some lettuces and some French beans, and then he ate some radishes. And then, feeling rather sick, he went to look for some parsley. But round the end of a cucumber frame, who should he meet but Mr. McGregor. Mr. McGregor was on his hands and knees planting out young cabbages, but he jumped up and ran after Peter, waving a rake and calling, "Stop thief! Stop thief!" Peter was most dreadfully frightened. He rushed all over the garden, for he had forgotten his way back to the gate. He lost one of his shoes among the cabbages and the other shoe among the potatoes. After losing them, he ran on 4 legs and went faster, so I think he might have got away altogether had he not unfortunately run into a gooseberry net and got caught up by the large buttons on his jacket. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons, quite new. Peter gave himself up for lost and shed big tears, but his sobs were overheard by some friendly sparrows, who flew to him in great excitement and implored him to exert himself. Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve, which he intended to pop upon the top of Peter, but Peter wriggled out just in time, leaving his jacket behind him. And he rushed into the tool shed and jumped into a can. It would have been a beautiful place to hide if it had not had so much water in it. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps hidden under a flower pot. He began to turn them over carefully, looking under each. Presently Peter sneezed, "Tissue!" and Mr. McGregor was after him in no time. And he tried to put his foot upon Peter, who jumped out of a window, upsetting 3 plants. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter, so he went back to work. Peter sat down to rest, and he was out of breath and trembling with fright. He had not the least idea which way to go. Also, he was very damp with sitting in that can. After a time he began to wander about, going lippity-lippity, not very fast, and looking all around. He found a door in a wall, but it was locked. There was no room for a fat little rabbit to squeeze underneath. An old mouse came running in and out over the doorstep, carrying peas and beans to her family in the wood. Peter asked her the way to the gate, but she had such a large pea in her mouth she could not answer. She only shook her head at him, and Peter began to cry. Then he tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled, and presently he came across a pond where Mr. McGregor filled his watering cans. A white cat was staring at some goldfish. She sat very, very still, but now and then the tip of her tail twitched as if it was alive. Peter thought it was best to go away without speaking to her. He had heard of cats from his cousin, little Benjamin Bunny. He went back towards the tool shed, but suddenly, quite close to him, he heard the noise of a hoe. Scritch, scratch, scratch, scritch, scratch. Peter scuttled underneath the bushes, but presently, as nothing happened, he came out and climbed upon a wheelbarrow and peeped over. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing onions. His back was turned towards Peter, and beyond him was the gate. Peter got down very quietly off the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as he could go, along the straight walk behind some blackcurrant bushes. Mr. McGregor caught sight of him out the corner, but Peter did not care. He slipped underneath the gate and was safe at last in the wood outside the garden. Mr. McGregor hung up the little jacket and the shoes for a scarecrow to frighten the blackbirds. Peter never stopped running or looked behind him till he got back home to the big fir tree. He was so tired he flopped down upon the nice soft sand of the floor in the rabbit hole and shut his eyes. His mother was busy cooking, and she wondered what he'd done with his clothes. It was a second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in a fortnight. I'm sorry to say that Peter was not very well during the evening. His mother put him to bed, made him some chamomile tea, and she gave a dose of it to Peter. 1 tablespoon taken at bedtime. But Flopsy, Mopsy and Cottontail had bread and milk and blackberries for their supper. The end. And there they are. You can see them having their supper. Night night.